Mindbend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
Kerstin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I said just moments ago, I always think it's important when we talk about psychedelic and when we're talking about people who are endeavoring to, say, utilize a classic psychedelic to have a particular experience, whether it's a recreational, ceremonial, therapeutic setting, that we consider the entirety of our psyche. Mm-hmm. And I have the opportunity here to bring guests on like yourself who spend their lives, who've made it their vocation and their living to spend time examining the psyche, to work with the psyche. And in your profession, you identify as a...
Well, I'm an associate marriage and family therapist.
Okay.
So I just finished grad school earlier this year, but I've been studying psychology, specifically Jungian adjacent dream work, since I was like 12 or 13, which was the same time I started getting into ritual magic. But now I have some acronyms behind my name and a degree.
What are the acronyms? LMFT, is that what it is?
LMFT is licensed. So when you graduate, you still have to get 3,000 hours. So when you graduate, you have like a good bulk of that. And then all of the schooling. And then you still have to earn tons of hours and then you get licensed. So
Okay.
I'm an associate, but
Okay.
I'm seeing clients. It's the same thing, just less exams under my belt.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, your website lays out a lot of, it lays out
Very
a lot.
verbose.
Well, there's a lot of information. I appreciate verbosity.
Me too.
I appreciate it. So, and we have the option to do that today. But it lays out a lot about your approach, about your values, and it kind of paints a picture of how you've created this pastiche of techniques and where you place focus and what you infuse your particular practice with. Mm-hmm. So give us a 10,000 foot view of why you're in this space to begin with. Like,
Yes.
what compels you to be in a position where you are helping other people by working with them to examine the unconscious, the subconscious, consciousness, and its multiple extraordinary and non-ordinary states.
Sure. So getting up to 10,000, I'll try to make this succinct, but basically just through my own, like most Chiron myth therapists, wounded healers, going through my own alchemization of trauma and pain throughout my life, done in okay ways, and then more examination and more like confrontation with the self, specifically through magic with a K, witchcraft. I saw and felt and experienced so much overlap, like just full Venn diagram overlapping middle section, just with ancient practices, ancient wisdom traditions. For me, pagan spirituality, because that's like my lineage. I'm first generation American from U.S. or from Finland. And animism and polytheism are all tenets of many pagans. I would say most pagans. Everyone's different. So in these experiences, I just kept bringing it back, like trying to anchor into something scientific sometimes, because I can go really out there, and that was psychology, which is actually what I think it was Richard Tarnas said. It's like where the stars left off, psychology picked up, like post-materialism, Hermeticism, like all of like that era of the scientific revolution. And so it felt very resonant for me, and it is like inner journey work. I've worked with, and I would say that sounds more professional and intentional, but I've fucked around with psychedelics since I was younger, like in my adolescence. And so that was still, that was kind of like in the periphery the whole time when I was studying dream work and reading about dreams and trying to work on myself. So fast forward, I went through working in the music industry, other careers, everything was just pulling me away. I was really unhappy, and I decided I wanted to be a psychotherapist and just go to school and have the anchoring and like the grounding and like the 3D-ness of education in school. But my experience was incredible. I did a specialization in spiritual depth, and they don't say Jungian, but it's heavily Jungian psychologies at Antioch. And I had incredible professors. I mean, we had a whole quarter of transpersonal psychology. You know, we talk about galactic family, people that have had experiences with meta-consciousness, and it was just incredible. And a lot of people now, and I think have been, but it's more in the sort of like lexicon, like way people are talking about therapy, like KAP and other psychedelic assisted therapy. So it's very front and center. So it just feels like it really overlaps, but I really let my freak flag fly. I was openly like, I'm an eclectic pagan witch. I do this. And I was concerned about backlash. And it was really, really healing for me to be able to be in that space in that way. And I did lectures and I've written papers on ritual magic and psychotherapy in multiple, I guess, through multiple lenses. And it all anchors back to consciousness and personal power.
That school piece sounds fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was rigorous. It was very confrontational and experiential. At my training site, there were students from other schools, and they're like, "What the fuck are you guys talking about?" You know, because there was a few of us together in our consultation or our supervision group, and it's very progressive, and it's really, really like pro healing. Like there's so much suffering going on and sticking to old paradigms, very archaic ways of doing psychology, very behavioral. That works, and I'm all for CBT for people that need it, but we need to expand the range of how we access the psyche and how we are in relationship with the guide and the collaborator of the therapist, which some people don't take that stance. It's more hierarchical. So that's how my school centered it. It was relational, humanistic, and then in my specific, and there were professors that weren't, you know, but in my specific specialization, it went into like transpersonal psychology, like Stan Grof, and just studying altered states.
Okay, so I'm going to zero in right on a certain feeling of awareness of magic and say, do you know the derivation of the term witch? Do you know where witch comes from and how it's derived?
I've read so many different things. Oh, like I'm 42. I got out of the broom closet when I was 12. So there's like all different kinds of I think variations. I'm sure there's an etymology that is concrete, but what I always remember is the word weird, like WEYRD, which is like Old English. Yeah. And that it kind of comes from that. But basically like what I've taken away from the word witch, it's like this reclamation from, you know, burning times when people were literally set on fire and drowned and everything, that they were like the shamans, the medicine folk, the cunning folk, in their communities. They were kind of the original therapists, and, you know, shamans still are. So depending on where you are in the world culturally, there's, you know, different terminology, but Indo-European paganism, I mean, it's like the crone energy, like the wise old woman. And even if they're not old, it's like the hedge witch at like the end of the field with like the garden. And I've always had those images actually in my mind since I was very little. Like I think I incarnated with a lot of memories from that, but that's what I connected to. It's like these medicine folk, cunning folk. Yeah.
That's great. I wasn't even thinking, I hadn't premeditated on the idea of the compare and contrast between shaman and witch. And shaman or guide is something that you hear come up in this space so often. Enlisting the help of a guide, enlisting the help of a shaman specifically.
And a witness.
Yeah, absolutely. A space holder. Traveling to Peru or traveling to Costa Rica to be in the presence of a shaman that's in a particular lineage, training with shaman, right? So does the term psychedelic often come up when you think about magic? Because this is something I think about too. Like to me, it all seems like magic. And to me, when I think about magic, I think about the world that we aren't commonly seeing, that has effect at all times and that we're constantly interrelating with, but isn't the world that we're, for all intents and purposes, actively engaged with. And then we're just coming out of Halloween season. I'll leave it at this for now. Do you hear the term psychedelic come up in the same conversation or the same topic or the same class or the same structure as witch or magic?
I would say synonymously maybe other terms, just depending on who you're talking to. But I think the energy of what psychedelic is and how I would describe it is, it is woven in. Because if you think about psyche, that's soul. It's like soul work. Delic, I think, is journeying or activity or something like that. So it's like a practice, an action, a journey and experience around the soul, doing soul work. And shamanism, sometimes, or in some shamanic practices, it's soul retrieval. And it's this work, it's not just like, yeah, like this is super fun. It's not always fun. It's intense. And so I think with witchcraft and witch, and like you said, magic, like Magick with a K, and Crowley, which, debatable people feel about him, but it's, we're in far gone from when he died, when people were really anti-Crowley. But he describes magic as an art and a science, which I think is important, these seemingly binary spaces and being in the paradox, like the tension between art and science. The art and science of making change occur with conformity to your will, with your will, which like your will, your solar plexus. And so it's a practice. It's like an action. So magic, I don't think is so much a space as much as a state and an experience and a practice versus like a dogmatic religion that has a belief system. And I say eclectic because I pull from different spaces. I mean, there are chaos magicians that don't use, it's not ceremonial or ritual at all. I love ceremony. I love ritual. I think everything should be about meaning making. I think talismans are important. But that's where I would kind of anchor it. And then the psychedelic part kind of comes in because that's the vehicle. It's like this energetic chariot that gets you to a different state, into that non-material like you were talking about.
Yeah. And then you could have a practitioner of magic and science accessing states without necessarily needing to utilize a psychedelic.
Yeah, and I think a lot, and where like the crossover again, I think a lot of people do use plant medicine. I think it's honoring however people came in and whatever your experiences in this lifetime have been of what feels safe for you. So like solfeggio frequencies, you can listen to, I have a friend, we were just talking about this, like every night. And if you don't want to go into other spaces, you can listen to him every night. She had a Kundalini awakening from YouTube solfeggio frequencies, right? Engaging Jungian, like being in the container with a therapist of doing dream work and amplification of symbols, going into under the ego, into the state of reverie, the daydream-esque space with active imagination. And it's just going into the liminal. That's what I think psychedelics are kind of a vehicle that get you into that liminal space. And it's medicine. And so insights are medicine too. So it just depends. Like some people feel safer in psychotherapy. Some people want to be solo. They want to do ancient rites and ritual with a shaman. But I think it's all kind of the same. They're all entry points to greater like source consciousness.
I like to think that human beings have, and my mom kind of called me on this the other day from using a term that's in the zeitgeist, or a term that's more popular. I hadn't heard it probably until not too long ago, but agency.
Yeah.
Doesn't that seem to be a term that's used now more than potentially in the past? But I like to think that we have agency in our state of wellness. I like to think that.
And sovereignty, yeah, these words are big, yeah.
I like to think that. I was raised Catholic, and I think even though I can't sit here and pinpoint the very moment to you that somebody explained to me what our faith was supposed to really encapsulate as the nature of good and evil, I have like vague kind of like recollections of the sense of what was happening, right? Basically, the fall and the fall and the diametrically opposed kind of forces or whatever, and that you want to be on this side. But so that's just to say that throughout most of my life, I've really written off the idea of some kind of like objective, malignant, permanently lasting, infinitely present evil force that's just existing solely to wreck human beings, which is kind of always how demons are portrayed, as these fallen angels that absolutely fucking hate us because we're still in God's good grace, or we're just stupid and slovenly creatures that whatever the story you've been told, right? So, but I tend to think, okay, I thought that's all bullshit. Fear is constructed just to by people placed on other people to suppress and control. And then Halloween season comes along, and I watch The Exorcist again, and I listen to my paranormal podcasts, and I you take bits of information out of different places, right?
Yeah.
And you see what kind of resonates for you and how you feel about things. What I'm getting at is like, there are a lot of anecdotes out there where people who I think I can get on board with are talking about the presence of external forces that are not operating with like a love, enlightenment, support vibe on the energy, and also people who are haunted or people who have entities attached to them. So from everything I ever thought about ghost stories and horror movies and paranormal and legends or whatever, right, growing up, and then starting to work in this world of psychedelics as a journalist and having conversations with people about what it means, what psychedelic means, and states of consciousness, you hear a lot of stories about people who are having trips where they're encountering entities or some kind of like parasitic, energetic vampire, like attachment, dark energy, whatever. You hear that a lot. I want to think that all of that is hogwash and that every person is a infinitely complex, divine experience of something purely magical that doesn't have time for the good, bad paradigm. Evil's out there. You always got to be evading it, and you need to use a talisman or you need to use some kind of potion or spell to keep it away. So answer for me definitively, the question that I'm trying to ask by muddling through all of this exposition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like my friends who have, who go on a psychedelic experience and encounter energies or who speak about energies, like what's going on, Kerstin? Like what do you think is really going on?
I can say what I think. I think it's important to honor people's belief systems, and that's very real for them. But I think everyone should be curious seekers, that really is that, we talk about inner child work. It's like going to the space of curiosity and imagination, and all of that, we know also makes our brain like more neuroplastic, where we're able to change neural synapses. So that's like a science sidebar. But in these spaces, I think it's just shadow. It's shadow work. And I think demons, and depending on who you talk to, demons can be symbols of things that we create that are projections, things that split off from us, that get relegated to the shadow. And then, in Jungian terms, they're called complexes. And then that's what sort of insidiously creeps in and creates this automatic behavior in waking life consciously, and things like conditions like depression, anxiety, things like that. So I think if you're on a trip and you are confronting something, that is your imagination, that's your mind, and your brain is in your skull, your mind is in your whole body and in your energy field, and that's your mind showing you symbols and images to create this imaginative, like a fantasy that's very connected, I think, to like Campbell's like hero's journey. It's being confrontational with yourself. It's deepening your relationship with yourself, including the shadow. So I think we all are like light being souls in these meat suits. And I do think that there is so much access and possibility for all of that. Like you're saying, the just being like high vibrational, and that it's not about warding off things. And this is something that I learned after a really long time of doing so much protection magic and sigils. And I think you said two big words like fear and love. And those are like the spheres that we're kind of shooting out of. We're making choices and decisions from one of these two places constantly. It's funny, Jim Carrey said something about this, and he's super deep. I didn't realize it. I saw
he
like
trips
random,
hard on
but
issues
it's so
of the psyche.
authentic.
He has,
There's something, like it's just really interesting. But I think I watched I'm hoping it was him because I might be getting this wrong. But yeah, so he's just said there's like fear and love, and I really think that's true. Like things can boil down to simplicity. So doing things out of fear, like protection magic, or having a trip and you're seeing demons or something, I don't necessarily believe that those are real. I have had ghost stuff happen when I was little. I do believe that there are energies that are in liminal spaces between dimensions and things like that.
I saw a ghost in high school also.
Yeah, this was like all through, and I think a lot of land, there's just like blood all over the land, like throughout the U.S. So there's where I grew up in Florida, and even talking to other friends, they had experiences where they saw like First Nations women like hovering over them and like just, that's a whole other podcast. But I do think there are energies and spirits like that some people who are very open have access to being in communication with. But I think on a trip, that's like the shadow. That's your own demons. And that's the work, is to integrate them. And this is even like, I'm just bringing everything back to psychotherapy, but like IFS parts work. It's a huge way that I work. I do it with a lot of spiritual clients, pagan clients, where we use different goddess pantheons. So people who have on their own had a psychedelic experience, we will process like what comes up, the symbols and the energies that come up. And when you give attention and intention to something, to a symbol, you put diffusion between you and it, because you can name it. And if you can talk about it, it's like it's this intimacy of getting to know it. And I think the fear of like old stories around demons and having no control and, like you said, no agency, it's like we do. You just have to lean into the fear and move past it. It's just a facade. It's like a shadow. And then there's something deeper underneath it it's like alchemical. Like that's the lead, and then there's like gold in there. But you have to lean into it and get to know it. And I think all of psychedelic journeying is about deepening our relationship with ourselves and with others through this like intimacy, like into me see, like intimacy. And that's what we're doing. And I think the fear-based, because I grew up Catholic too. My dad was Ukrainian, Italian Catholic. And I loved the ceremony. I sang in the choir, but it is so fear-based. And like you said, that I think that is what a lot of people do. They hold you in a low vibration of fear, because we have so much personal power, access to so much in our minds, that it scares these old, antiquated structures.
So I'm going to dumb it down again. Thank you so much. Do demons attack us? Are there like little monster demons out there jumping into us?
I would say no, but what I can say, and this is going into where I lose people. I'm going to do it. So there are people that have had experiences. I've read a lot. I got really deep into reading about galactic, like extraterrestrials, galactic family, I would call them. I do think there has to be something else out there, and that there are higher forms of consciousness. I was reading a book about Arcturians and a man who works with Arcturians, and they do say that there are archons and attachments that can come in, but it's just dark energy, and they do attach. I don't know. I'm a curious seeker. I like to read everything, and that's something that's the first thing that came to mind when you were saying that. Yeah. The religious iconography of demons, I mean, Lucifer means light bringer. Like that all I think is, and I don't want to offend anybody, but it was really traumatic for me, and I think it's bullshit and it's fear-based. And I lived so long from a fear-based space. And I think if it works for you, that's great. But I mean, I saw it tear my dad apart through it till he died. Yeah. And so personally, I think it's a dense, low vibration. And we can measure frequencies, love, peace. My friend, actually, we were just talking about this as well. She said the highest measurable frequency is authenticity. So being in these spaces, and not that anything is anyone's fault for having demons or these shadow energies come in. We all have it. It's what we sign up for Earth School when we incarnate. We're here to do that. I think we all have.
That's your thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And noetic sciences, knowing thyself. So I think it is that journeying in and just befriending the demons. Ask them what they want you to know. It's that curious seeker energy, the way children have before they get shrouded with horseshit from the world, and they're fearless. And so I think if you move the fear aside and the ego aside, you can access that. So I don't think demons attack. I am so curious about extraterrestrial life, and I'm sure there's light and dark everywhere. Maybe Star Wars has been onto something for a while. Maybe that's why so many people like fucking love that, because there's
Star
something and Star Trek,
the Prime
for
Directive.
Sure. Yeah, and that even gets more granular in relationships too, I think. But yeah, there's something resonant about it. It's like this returning to something. So I'm so open to all that, and that's the only space I feel like that could happen. I don't think there's little hell demons. I think we create that, and that hell can be everywhere.
Why would a human being be motivated to be kind, decent, supportive, thoughtful, considerate of another human being?
Wow.
Is it just because maybe 7 times out of 10 it proves to be more logistically advantageous? I mean, because you can understand that person sees other person near food, person is larger than other person, person smashes person to take food away.
Yeah.
How does that evolve to being like a great 3rd grade teacher who decides that like children's lives matter and they want to try to build a better world? Like, how do we, what's the point of somebody being like genuinely, and because to be a benevolent minded person, you need to have some torture over with, right? Or maybe you've never experienced it in the first place somehow, right? But like, I think there's a lot of horrific things done from people to other people when they're coming from a place of not having had the experience of being motivated by any kind of like overwhelming love-based existence, right? Or like they just, so how did we get to a point where we even think it's the norm to be decent to one another? And is being decent and considerate and soulful towards one another a product of a healthily regulated neurological system?
Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of the nervous system, the big buzzword is the vagus nerve and like vagal toning and polyvagal theory. And that's like this cranial nerve that wraps around all kinds of like our throat, our heart, our lungs, and our digestive system. It's like the gut-brain axis. And that has been very spiritual, actually, I've noticed with my clients and doing breath work, and then also just vagal toning exercises. So it is like scientifically in the body, but it actually produces these states of inner peace, and the down regulation of the parasympathetic nervous system comes online. And that peace, I think, is where people have access beyond, if it's hatred, disgust, whatever from other people. Those are blockages. Like, we're all kind of mirrors for each other. And it's almost like reflections come in from other people. They get like introjected into the self. And it's like this almost like self-hatred, or it's these things about ourselves that we don't like or that we're disgusted by. And I think that's the projection. And also fear, like it comes from fear to be so hateful to somebody else. So I think it's this, again, it's shadow work. It's what is inside of me that I hate so much, like my shame or whatever it is, that is making me then project onto others and take action or be verbally abusive to somebody and be hateful. I think innately it feels good to be kind and good to other people. I mean, you can measure it. That it's like, endorphins, just putting your hand over your heart with some pressure simulates a hug and you get oxytocin, and so it's this connection. We need to be connected. We're literally like wired to connect, and that disconnect, whatever chasm is living in somebody, whatever fraction, usually relationally, trauma, whatever, that got somebody to be in a space of so much fear that they have to be hateful towards other people. I do think it's inner work. And then there's just cultural conditioning. There's, you could branch out into different spheres, but I think it's just people innately want to love and be loved. I think it's a core, it's a very high frequency, and it's a core essence in ourselves. It's removing the blockages and rewriting the narratives that can get you there in whatever way that looks like. If it's shamanic work, psychedelics, psychotherapy, a little bit of everything, magic. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah, of course. Did Jung, first of all, why is Jung the apex, so intensely the apex? It seems like it.
He wasn't for a while.
Okay. So
yeah.
So prior to 1971 or something, that he wasn't as popular.
Well, yeah, when he was like coming up, like he and Freud, were like colleagues, and then they split because Jung was going in a very different direction. As a psychiatrist and like a brain scientist, at that time you can't really, I guess, I don't know, I wasn't there, maybe I was, I don't remember. You can't really talk about certain kinds of things in the medical field and in that space. without getting degradation. Kind of like now where there are physicists, like quantum physicists studying consciousness, and they get all this shit from scientific colleagues. And again, it's like fear. But he went through his own personal experiences, and I think he was a channeler. He had psychics in the family that did seances and things like that. He did every client's astrology chart, but all this was not revealed until later because he would have lost his reputation. But he had such personal experiences. He had a guide called Philemon, and just all these images that came in through dreams and reverie. And that's where he developed like all the core tenets of the practice. And again, like there's some antiquated things, like everything's always evolving. So there's like neo-Jungians and everything. But I think extracting what works and then kind of making everything a little bit integrative and eclectic is the best way to go. But his core tenets are, working with the unconscious, the shadow being a very medicinal space that you can spelunk into your own personal cave and collect all kinds of gems. And then that work is integrating them in individuation. And he used the alchemical process as a metaphor of all these stages. And like Negredo is like the shadow work, right? So I think he's really gotten more popular because people are waking up more and more and more. I have a client, we were just talking about Man and His Symbols, and he was reading it and was like, yeah, this is like no shit, And I was like, yeah, but if you think about the context of the time, this is like not in like the lexicon or the culture of how people talk about psychology. And so now I think it just shows measurably that we are all more open to different kinds of avenues for accessing consciousness and integrating our demons, integrating all of our parts. And so he was so into symbol, and he would draw mandalas, and it's just all this, it's a lot of like exercises that I think he created like a practice versus a belief system and a hierarchical experience of a therapist telling a client what they're doing, sitting behind them on the couch. It was like more relational too. And that's Carl Rogers too. I think like Rogers and Jung, that's kind of like the sweet spot. So I think that's why,
It's
imagination.
It's hard for me to think about, with all the brilliant people in the world, like there are 1, 2, or 3 that seem to be like the giant voices in a particular field.
Yeah,
right?
and of an era too, probably.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking like, 60 years from now, like what revelations are we going to have that seem like we thought we were on to something now? Are there any female luminaries of like Jung's peers or somebody who's been that prolific or influential in the field of psychology or
Yeah, I'm sure a lot. I mean, unfortunately, I've studied. A lot of it's like white men.
Yeah.
Not a female, but somebody who I think is important. That's not necessarily psychology, but Malidoma Patrice Somé has been like a great teacher for me. He dropped his body like 2 years ago, but he was of the Dagara cosmology from West Africa. But he came to the States. I think he taught. He was a professor, I want to say at Harvard. Anyway, but bringing psychology and the psyche, I think were like core tenets of what he was bringing in around ritual and the return to rites of passage and focuses like that. That's kind of in another direction. But Marie-Louise von Franz was Jung's protege and translated a lot of his work. And she was right. And she, in her own right, was just like magnificent. I think she falls, there's like the Jungians, it's like the umbrella, but I think there are a lot of people that take like that extraction of like the cream of the crop from it, and then they take it and run with it in their own way. Off the top, it's unfortunate. Yeah, I can't think of anyone else besides her right now, but it's just like a lot of Jungians that I think I've followed. In the field, just right now, contemporarily, I would say Ariel Schwartz has been an amazing teacher as well. I haven't worked with her personally, but just doing workshops. And she's a polyvagal and yoga. She's a polyvagal practitioner, which is like doing the vagus nerve, like vagal toning and yoga. And she's been a therapist for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. I can't remember. I'm probably getting that wrong. But she has been really pivotal because she's bridging a lot of different concepts together, and she can dip into the spiritual and the sort of non-traditional and then anchor back a lot to science. And so she's been really important to me too. Off the top, that's who I can think of.
What was the name of the first person? Malidormo?
Oh, Malidoma Patrice Sommet.
Okay.
I get like emotional like thinking about him. The biggest takeaway from him was just like how we need more sacredness and how we don't really have rites of passage in the like Western culture. It's funny, like I did this in a lecture. So even back to ritual magic, and because he's talking about ritual, you know, we blow out birthday candles and make a wish. Like that's literally candle magic. That's what it is, you know? And there are numerous other things we do that we are just integrated into the culture. But there's so many more that we don't honor. We don't pause and slow down and have ceremony and make things sacred and give meaning to things.
Yeah.
And that I think is super important. And that is what psychology essentially is, like depth psychology. It is meaning making.
I saw Allison and Alex Gray at the Philosophical Research Society give a talk recently, and it was really, 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 really heartening and encouraging.
Yeah, I love them.
They were so genuine. There was no pompousness about how cool they were or how OG they were or anything. It was, they met in 72 in art school and they've never been apart, and they've created so much stuff together, and they were very accessible with their messaging. It was like I said, it was very heartening, very spiriting. One of the two big things I took away from that lecture, that talk, Allison expressed that through her psychedelic experiences, I think one of her biggest takeaways was that she saw existence divided into roughly three categories: unity, chaos, and symbol or language.
Yes.
Like there's like the three kind of consistent eternal realities that, you know, and unity is the underlying nature and the connectedness of everything, and chaos wasn't necessarily like pain and suffering, but just like the process of forming.
Yeah,
right?
creating tension to grow.
Yeah. And then language and symbol was everything that's needed operationally to get through everything. And so that resonated. And then the other thing was how the practice of art is essentially worship, you know, and it's a recognition of the divine. And as a perpetually scraping by, freelancing, you know, multi-interested artist, I identify with as a musician and filmmaker and podcaster and errand runner, house cleaner, you know, whatever. That was just heartening to hear too. Like, okay, you know, I grew up in this religious environment, right, where you're a good kid if you, and everybody, I think, at least I wanted to be a good kid for my parents. I loved them. They didn't torture me, you know. I wanted to, one of the things you want to do is please them, and it pleases them when you worship the same way they do, right?
Conform.
But I couldn't do that. And, but I've always felt like my connection to music specifically, because I feel like music is one of the most accessible, purest images of the divine, even if it's death metal, whatever, you know.
I
like,
mean, I've been a huge fan of black metal, and I've had extremely cathartic experiences to listen. Yeah,
but it's a powerful human thing that transcends the senses. And then, you know, we go through the pandemic years of not having any gatherings for shows, any crowd energy, any exchange between the performer and the artist, and that. But just again, like, it's such an important thing to me. And you were working in that world. So I would like you to touch on that for a little bit as someone who, because business always is fucky. And
super fucky.
Yeah. And so were you working in the music business in Los Angeles?
Yeah, briefly. That's why I moved down here. So I worked both in like major label and then artist management. The most fun was just like a small artist management company, and it had friends' bands in there, and it was more experimental artists, like doom metal, more singer-songwriter-y, but kind of like on the macabre side. And I toured a lot, and that's like kind of how I first started, was like going on tour with friends' bands and then friends of friends, and then like doing merch and driving and tour managing. And then got a job through my friend who hooked it up, my friend Susie Yoder. She helped facilitate a job at Republic Records. So that's really big. That was like, The Weeknd was coming up at that time, Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, all those bands, and then Cash Money was part of it too. And so that was fun because it was like, I was an idea guy. I was doing marketing and running the news section of the website. Nothing too crazy, but I got to sit in on meetings and pitch ideas and things like that. And then that was like contracted, and then it segued into the smaller artist management. And that was really fun, but like I couldn't survive off of that. And I moved down here working for Sony, but specifically Century Media, which had like Scorpions on it, and then a bunch of like various kinds of metal genre bands. And that was great, but then Sony Red bought out Century Media, it just got gobbled up. And then everything also, what I was noticing was just everything was turning into being a social media manager. I was a copywriter and like a marketing person. And I like doing ideas or coming up with ideas and being the idea guy and writing about it and actioning on a very small level things, but I didn't want to do social media or anything beyond that. Like I'm not like a businessy business person. I don't really like a set schedule. And so it was just really dark. And then I won't go into it because I don't want to say anything bad, but the last job I had, it was working for a huge band. I would have fantasies of getting in like a car accident so I didn't have to go to work. And then finally we agreed, like I got laid off because it wasn't what I signed up for at all, because it was all social media. And I really don't like doing social media. Yeah. So that was kind of the business side of music. I think was just this, it's not really pro artist. It's not the way it like used to be, the way I have it romanticized in my mind. And just with technology, it really changes the landscape. And some people are so good at it and they love it. And I don't. Yeah. I really don't. I want to be around people, and when I was at Republic, it was such a good job and I got to interview artists and it was really, really cool. But that was sort of the break. I'm like, I need to be with people. And I think that was part of the catalyst too. I knew when I went to grad school that I wanted to do psychotherapy with esoteric practices involved. But it was just the break from music and missing that esoteric relational part, I think was just felt so deeply.
Could you tell us about a transcendental or psychedelic experience that you had that was directly related to music, that music had a prominent feature in?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. But one, when I was thinking about this, one that has an interesting kind of ending. So when I was younger, I was like a punk skater kid. I was really into like punk and metal, and
Florida?
I was getting Tampa in the 90s. So it was awesome. And people constantly rag on Florida. It's like there's shitbags everywhere. It's really cool. And it was like goth capital of the world, going to the castle. So I would sneak out and go to these clubs with older friends. And I did acid for the first time. So LSD was like the first psychedelic. I'm very careful. I don't like feeling sick, and I wanted to be in control of things. So I never did more than one hit, I think, for most of my life. In other times that I did it, it wasn't that frequent. And I remember going to a club with a friend, and I wasn't really into techno, but I was like, whatever. And it was like drum and bass. And it was just like the most next level experience. And I think now that I've studied psychology, I was like, oh my God, that's like, so plant medicine or, psychedelic experiences mixed with somatic body experiencing of like the tone, the bass, drums, everything. And having that affect, it's like cymatics, like affecting the water in your body. Like if you have a bowl of water and you play certain tones, like there will ripple out into different shapes. Like if you are familiar with that. So I remember just thinking every cell in my body was rippling out into some kind of energy field that wasn't just mine. And it was so overwhelming, but I had the container of my friends. I remember I could see my friends and then like dancing. It was just such a somatic experience. The precursor is I was diagnosed with aortic stenosis when I was in elementary school, which is the way my 4th grade brain remembers. It's like your tricuspid valve and one of the doors doesn't open. So I was getting EKGs and EEGs every year, I think twice a year through middle school and I think into 9th grade. It was 8th or 9th grade. After doing acid and having this experience, and then thereafter, like other experiences, just being in my room and listening, I was really into like Skinny Puppy and like other metal music. I went and got an EKG and EEG, and they said that it was not an issue anymore. So literally, the door to my heart opened. I think after having these experiences, and I remember they asked like, "What are you doing differently? Like, what happened?" And that was the only variable. It was just having an experience with LSD in communion with my friends who were like my chosen family. Like punk communities are very tight, you know? And so I felt safe. So it was like setting the intention of kind of being in community with these other people, like dancing. And I wasn't like a rave dance, like I didn't really do that, but I just went and I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna like go with it. And it was so visceral, and it just felt, you know, and everyone, I think they say these things, but when you really remember how you feel, you can't really describe it. It's this imprint that doesn't really leave you. And the biggest takeaway for me is just like the door to my heart literally opened. Like I think that has to do something. Like I want to believe that had to do with it, you know. But there's so many other experiences connected to music. I feel like with psychedelics as well. Not that I've done a fair share throughout my life. But yeah.
Does it ever, thank you so much for sharing that story. And it was just that time that you went to that experience
no, there were others, but that was like,
it wasn't like I'm treating my heart condition with LSD.
No, not all. Yeah. In fact, so this is like why I'm a big proponent of breath work too. And that going into altered states, I was so conscious of like worrying about something happening to me. And I was like very nervous, and I was talking to my friends, and, so I remember like noticing my breath a lot and like hearing my breath go in and out. And then I just like, I remember there was like, this is so crazy too. I was like 13, but I remember this just trust, like noticing the fear and then just like pushing through and just trusting that my heart could take care of itself and that I will breathe and that I will be okay. Granted, when we're adolescents, like our prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet. So our logic mind and, you know, being impulsive is a little out there, but I was very, I had a good boatload of trauma from childhood on. I was very wanting to be in control and very self-aware of being like awake, like conscious. So I do recall these like experiences with my body, with breathing, noticing my heart, and then just like moving with like just I love like drums, and I played drums later, but drums and even like shamanic drumming. I mean, there's like, again, it's this return to something that you know, this ancient knowing. Yeah. And so it was just this flow state and this peacefulness. And so, you know, you're a 13-year-old girl, like you worry about what people, like all that just fell away. So it felt like being like everybody in that particular space. I think it was at Boatyard Village, in St. Pete. It's just like in the middle of nowhere. Like we all moved into something different together. And I think it's the energy, the way like people do breath work together, doing ritual magic together, doing psychedelic experiences together. It shifts the energy field, you know? I think it really, really does. And if you could measure it, it would be interesting. But I think that was a big part of it too. If there were very dense, low vibrational people there, if I didn't feel safe with the friends I was with, I think it could have been very different. And maybe I would have seen demons, you know, they were definitely there. But in that space, it was very medicinal, and it felt like a release, like something shrouding me got released. And then there was like a connection with myself, like a very deep, like a trust. Yeah.
Do you have a take on the current landscape in this country in terms of the visibility that the classic psychedelics have gained in recent years with documentary films and books that have been written, and colleagues that are working as psychologists or psychotherapists, whether they're utilizing CAP or whether they're going on ayahuasca retreats on their own, or could you give us a little takeaway or your thoughts on the landscape and maybe what you think is working or what you're cautionary, potentially what should be greeted with caution, or where we could be headed, or changes you've seen?
I think definitely, especially in school and grad school with colleagues, just hearing about their catalyst for becoming a psychotherapist and wanting to do like KAP sessions and journey work with people. I think the landscape is shifting a lot. I think a huge reason for that is that younger generations are so destigmatizing of a lot of old plug and play automatic belief systems we all have. Children of baby boomers, you get programmed with certain stuff. And a lot of, I think this work is deprogramming. It can just take a while to get there. But young people right now, like teens and 20s, they're really open. There's so much fluidity and openness around, gender, sexuality, and what spirituality even means, and just what is just normalizing what is kind of something everybody's thinking about, and taking away the fear-based programming, like those old marijuana ads, like the 20s reefer madness, like all that kind of stuff. And so we've had our own versions of that, I think, especially around psychedelics. I think that's a big catalyst because they're using their voices. And then I think a lot of people that are, 30s, 40s, are obviously younger psychotherapists too, but from what I experienced, like I was probably mid-aged. There were people mid-30s into like 50s and 60s where this is like a third career. Mm-hmm. And because they had a personal experience and they want to share it. So they want to do this. So I think the landscape is changing. It's opening up. I think also there's like the gold standard of research that one professor said it's like 10 years, but it's at least like a chunk of years where you have controlled randomized trials. And I think that's also easing up the kind of hatery energy around that. Mm-hmm. And other people that are just the curious seekers. So I think the scientists are getting on board and people are having their own experiences, and then reputable names that kind of anchor into being open to that. I'm not totally sure that Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel, that he's, I would imagine he's a proponent of psychedelic assisted therapy, but he was a neuroscientist and got really he had his own experiences around meditation and mindfulness, and he's done so much research, and he was a huge person that we studied in school around consciousness and sort of the power of our minds and going into these states. And it wasn't about psychedelics, but he normalized it as well. So I think the science is coming in and making it feel safer for people that maybe otherwise judged it or just didn't feel safe. So it's definitely changing. And I just, a friend who I deeply love and respect, my friend Miriam Brown, she just announced that she's starting KAP, and she's somebody I would like absolutely trust. And now I have like personal references of people that I would do that with. It's so intimate, and I think more and more people know somebody who knows somebody that did it, and that it's just going to take time to ripple out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If someone wants to work with you or learn more about what you do, or where do people go to learn about the work you're doing and or potentially work with you?
My website right now, like I said, I have my like witchcraft, like tarot social media thing that I did during the pandemic while I was in school. But that's kind of a throwaway thing. So probably just the therapy website. It's just KirstinHernTherapy.com. And it, as you mentioned, it's very robust because I feel like it will answer a lot of questions people have. I see all types of clients, individuals, couples, children, teens. I'm really hoping to get some teen witches. I know they're out there and they're suffering, and oh my God, I just want to be with them. But I also work with people where there's no esoterica. There's nothing like, I still have like a master's degree in clinical psychology, but I've noticed like by just being really open about my personal practices and the way that I like to use like tarot and archetypal symbolism and even astrology archetypes with clients, that in LA too, people really want that. They want that deeper experience. So there are clients where we don't talk about that, but I would say most of my caseload now are people that are really open to using that and doing ritual. Like we create inner child altars. I had a client do candle magic with their dead name, a trans client who like they were not getting affirmed or respected by family. And that's where it's like, okay, we have no control over this. So let's create a ceremony, like a fire ceremony, to burn your dead name.
That's what you're referring to when you talk about ritual magic or earth magic.
Yeah, earth magic is using the elements and the cycles of seasons as sort of like the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. And again, that mirroring, that the natural world and the cosmos mirror us and our internal worlds, as well as like people moving around mirroring us, to get information, to deepen our relationship with ourselves. And then ritual magic, it's the creating the space and the tools, talismans to have a set intention, kind of get actioned and to create change, and using words. This is why mantras are so important, writing things out. We call it a petition in witchcraft. And this is where like the psychology info is so deep and validating. We know like writing things out longhand creates like bilateral stimulation in the brain that helps with processing. So that's why journaling is actually extremely therapeutic. And so that's something you do in your Book of Shadows. You write out kind of what your ritual was like, what you experienced, doing shadow work with obsidian mirror scrying. I've done that with a couple clients, where you get into a liminal state through breath, setting intention, having some warm tea, just sitting down with a candle, and you gaze into a slab of obsidian, which is, it was like lava, but it's like a black stone, and you just allow your ego mind and logic mind to move to the side, and you just notice what you see, and you just write down images, like what does your face look like? Did it look like your grandma? Did it look like a dragon? And then you amplify those symbols and themes. So it all is so therapeutic, and you can really boil down everything that is ancient to something that people are doing therapeutically now in the field of psychology and psychotherapy. I think there's so much crossover if you just give it some attention.
Well, and it's that toolkit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the box of resources, the bag of tricks, and you hear about nutrition and biohacking, but practices, ceremony, creating,
slowing down, present,
creating space, and this is something that you're passionate about. It's innate. It's genetic. It's cosmic. I know you have clients later today, so I can't keep you any longer, but really continue to feel like it's important, like I said at the beginning to you. We're talking about exploring our psyches, whether it's through ingesting psilocybin or ketamine or LSD, or whether it's through meditation or breath work or counseling, whatever. Like, if one of the things that continues to be important to me is just to create a container for dialogue about what are we talking about? What's consciousness? What's extraordinary consciousness? What's non-ordinary consciousness? And how can we be skillful in our exploration? So I appreciate what you've shared in terms of how you practice that exploration. Is there any last note you'd like to leave the audience with today, kind of looking back on the ground that we've covered? If anybody has any last takeaway that you would share in terms of, hey, this is kind of what's going on, or if you have this concern, this is an option, or...
I think what first comes to mind is just like really leaning into personal power. That's been a theme that's come up with a lot of clients, is where's our personal power? And that power, not meaning you're overtaking somebody, but being in a space where you can access more of yourself that is sort of like underneath, there's like the soul soil, kind of like underneath like tree, like root systems. Like the deeper you can go and the more you can try to move past fear programming, there is so much liberation. And however you get there, whatever vehicle you can get in to do it, is just so deeply connected with other people. That's where you find other people's roots. And I think just really allowing yourself to change your mind about things, about yourself, about other people, and changing your narrative, that shapes your reality. Like words are spells. The word spelling, it comes from that. So noticing the way that you talk about yourself, noticing how you talk to other people, be intentional, just slow the fuck down and just listen to yourself and just notice things. Everything is so fast. That's why I think my aversion to technology, I feel I have like hag energy. I came in super old. It's amazing in a lot of ways. It is life-saving. It is creating technologies that we have access to so much more. I'm not opposed to it, but on a personal, like in the microcosm of our day-to-day life, I think slowing down and returning to nature. I mean, that's earth magic. It's flowing with cycles. Like we're in fall right now at Mabon and Samhain, we just Halloween. It's the veil between worlds is thin. Like what can you access? Who do you want to honor? Reverence, having ceremony, letting things fall away. Things are dying. That's what they're supposed to do. Let go of the fear, allow things to fall away, notice the beauty in it, and then harvest. And that's taking accountability with where you're at, including being proud of yourself. So just sort of using, like flow with nature more, just have some calibration around that in communion with the technology. And just find that personal power. And that power comes from moving through fear. And this is not something easy. I mean, I'm still working on it on such deep levels. But it's so liberating and it's such personal work. And I think that comes from being attuned to the world around you and just really, really slowing down and noticing how we speak about ourselves, what we write. Like that is something really big that seems maybe kind of benign, but that really does create our reality. Like you can change your reality through the way that you repeatedly talk to and about yourself. Repetition is learning and it's carving these new neural pathways. And I think it can be really magical.
Kerstin, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.